Gaming journalists are biased towards Xbox. They have been the entire time that I've covered Xbox, and I think that it's our job to call them out. Not that they're bad people, just that they're biased. We're all biased. I'm biased. I'm an Xbox guy. I'm biased towards Xbox. My bias is going to show. I'm not dishonest about that bias. That's literally what this entire channel is. And I think that gaming journalists just don't do a good job of being careful about that. And there's a prime example of this right here in this article. And to be fair, I'm not the one that caught this. My man J-Rock, shout out to J-Rock, is the one that pointed this out. So I thought, hey, why don't we take a look at this bias right here, dive into the articles, and see what is actually said here. So shout out to J-Rock for pointing this out on Twitter. I pulled up the articles here. So what we have here is this journalist, Dustin Bailey, over on Games Radar. Now, I don't make this video to say Dustin Bailey's a bad guy or to say that you should do anything you shouldn't. Good guy. Great writer, I'm sure. That's why he's here at Games Radar. But I do think we need to point out biases where they're at, and this is a prime example of that. Look at this headline. Sorry, Redfall, I'm not going back to 30 frames per second console games. This is an opinion piece, so this is his opinion. Redfall is taking the wrong path on the inevitable new-gen crossroads. This was April 12th. This was when the news dropped that Redfall would be dropping with only 30 frames per second, not 60 frames per second. And in this, he goes through, and I've highlighted the parts where he really talks about this. He says, 60 frames per second games simply feel dramatically better to play. And now that I've spent nearly 3 years getting used to console games with higher frame rates, I don't think there's any level of graphical fidelity impressive enough to make me willing to go back. He continues, I don't think I'm going to have the patience to wait for that moment, talking about when Redfall eventually brings 60 frames per second as a patch. He says, we're at a bit of a crossroads here, and as devs start to really push the capabilities of the new machines, they're going to start to ask questions. Do we prioritize fancy visuals or smooth performance? For me, that question is barely worth asking, implying that 60 frames per second is where he's at. End quote. I'm not going back to 30 frame per second console games. Now, Redfall dropped on the Xbox. This was news when it dropped because this was an Xbox game. So, a big game, Zelda, just dropped at 30 frames per second. See what he has to say. Same writer. What he has to say, nothing. Tears of the Kingdom brings back traditional Zelda dungeons, and I couldn't be more excited. Does not talk anywhere in here about 30 frames per second. Just glowing about Zelda, and probably right. I've not yet jumped into Zelda. I just downloaded it. I hear it's fantastic. Most Zelda games are. However, I thought you weren't going back to 60 frames per second. What happened? But I was able to manage. So this is the one that J-Rock actually pointed out on Twitter. Again, shout out to J-Rock. This comparison here. But I found another one right here by the same writer. It runs surprisingly well on Switch. 6 years later, Nintendo still knows how to make the most of Switch. This article is all about Digital Foundry's analysis of Tears of Kingdom at 30 frames per second. And he goes through and he just says, it seems like it's running pretty good. He does not make this would be, all he has to do is add a sentence, this would be better at 60 frames per second to even appear fair here. But why? It's a Nintendo game. I mean, it's Zelda. All that matters in games, ultimately, and Zelda is proof of this, is that it's fun. I'm not saying that. This is not a knock on Zelda. This is a knock on gaming journalists who hold one standard for Xbox. I'm never playing a game that's not 60 frames per second ever again. Xbox, get your shit together. To Nintendo, runs really well at 30 frames per second, guys. Beautiful at 30 frames per second. Love it. Loving it. This bias exists. Again, it's existed since I can remember inside of Xbox. I don't think this guy's a bad person. I don't think you should tweet at him or anything like that. But I do think Mr. Dustin Bailey should be aware how this looks. I think Games Radar should be aware of how this looks. He can write this. He can have this opinion, and he can say that this is just specific to Xbox and PlayStation because they've advertised 60 frames per second. That's fine. Then you should say that here in your headline. Or you should say that somewhere in the article, and not be specific. Gaming, and here's what annoys me. Gaming journalists catch us on semantics all the time. Indeed, the last 2 weeks or last week and a half of Phil Spencer's interview has been this game of semantics that gaming journalists play. They will take quotes out of context, not apply the context to it, to make headlines. Meanwhile, they expect us to give them the benefit of the doubt. Well, wait a minute. That's not what I meant. Well, I'm done giving you the benefit of the doubt. I will treat you how you treat us. And by us, I mean us as normal gamers, us as normal people, us as fans of the genre. You expect us to be semantically correct and precise in everything that we say. I'm going to hold you to it. We're going to start doing a regular series here, biasness against Xbox, and shutting it down and pointing it out because I think it's important. I think it's therapeutic, honestly, because it's very frustrating to see the console that I love just bashed all the time and unfairly. When it's relevant, sure, of course, deservedly so. The Redfall launch, deservedly. The semantic games that they played with Phil Spencer's interview and quotes, though, it's not fair. So it's time. It's time to expose it. I would love to know actually what your guys' experience has been. Do you find that gaming journalists are biased against Xbox more often than not? Is it just my own prejudice here? Am I biased? Am I blind? Can I not see the forest for the trees? Let me know in the comments below. Also, let me know some of the most biased stories that you've seen. Share links to them in the comments to this video. Hit that like button. Subscribe to this video. My name is X1 the Gamer. We do Xbox videos all the time right here on this channel. I'll see you guys next time.